Have you ever witnessed a family fall apart in just a few minutes? I have. And it all started with a seemingly harmless question asked over dinner. Before I tell you the whole story, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to follow the channel to catch the next parts. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. That evening, the autumn sky in Asheville was unusually dark, as if it knew what was coming. The antique clock struck 8 just as we sat down at the table. It was my grandmother's 75th birthday, Grandma Rose. She was the heart of the Carter family, and that evening was planned to be a perfect celebration wine, flickering candles, and a table full of her favorite dishes. I, Daniel Carter, sat at the edge of the table near the window where I could quietly observe everything. Across from me were my parents, Thomas and Linda. A few seats away was my brother Lucas, who the family always saw as the brightest star. And at the head of the table sat Grandpa Harold, silent and watchful as always. The atmosphere was warm at first. Lucas told jokes, my dad pretended to laugh heartily. My mom nodded as if listening to a TED Talk, and Grandma Rose smiled gently, her eyes sparkling as if trying to soak in every moment of the evening. Everything seemed perfect, until Grandma set down her fork and knife and looked at me. "Dear Daniel," she said, her voice still carrying its familiar warmth, "I've been meaning to ask but kept forgetting. Is the $1,500 I send you every month enough? If it's not, just tell me, don't be shy." I remember I was cutting a piece of chicken when my hand froze mid-air. The room fell silent. No more laughter. No more clinking of cutlery. Everything was still. I looked at her, then at my parents. They were frozen like wax statues. Lucas raised an eyebrow as if he'd just heard something irrelevant to him. "You send money to me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've never received anything." A sharp gasp broke the silence. It was my mom. She was still smiling, but the smile seemed drained of life. My dad stared at his wine glass, as if hoping it could swallow him whole to escape the moment. I didn't know what I felt then. Shock, yes. Confusion. Absolutely, but above all, a rising sense of unease, like my entire life had just been rewound, forcing me to re-examine every memory, every moment of exhaustion, every shattered hope. For the past 3 years, I'd been juggling 2 things at once, studying and working myself to the bone as a waiter and a library assistant. Every night, I'd collapse in my room, my body ready to give out. I thought I was living independently, building character, as my parents always said. But now, in their cold, frozen gazes, I wasn't so sure anymore. Grandma Rose sat up straighter. The gentleness left her face, replaced by a rare sternness. She looked directly at my parents. "Thomas, Linda, explain. Don't look away from the screen, because what they said next will show you why my entire family crumbled in a single night." My mom spoke first, her voice high and unnatural. We were just holding it for him, Rose. We planned to give it back to Daniel when he graduated, as a surprise. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. A surprise for the money that could have changed 3 exhausting years of my life. Grandma Rose didn't respond immediately. She turned to my dad. "You were a banker, Thomas. You know the difference between holding money and misappropriating it. Don't lie to me." My dad didn't argue. He just nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on his empty plate. The silence spread heavy, suffocating. I looked at Lucas. Not a hint of remorse. Just annoyance, as if I were the one causing trouble. Suddenly, a chair scraped loudly. Melissa, Lucas's fiancée, stood up abruptly. Her hand gripped her wine glass tightly, her eyes cutting into Lucas like a blade. "Lucas," she said through gritted teeth, "we need to talk. In the hallway. Now." She didn't wait for a response. Lucas stood and followed her out. Everyone pretended to continue eating, but no one touched their food. No one dared look at each other. Then, slap, a loud sound echoed from the hallway. Not a clap, a slap. The door slammed shut, and when Lucas returned alone, his left cheek bore a red handprint. He muttered, "She's gone. Happy now, everyone." Something cracked inside me. A small part of me had hoped he'd understand. But no, he didn't. He just blamed me for ruining everything. And that my friend was just the beginning. In the next chapter, I'll tell you what happened when I discovered a secret hidden in Lucas's room, something that made me not just a victim of deception, but of a far more serious crime. Leave a comment if you've ever been in a similar situation, when the people closest to you made you lose trust. I want to hear your story. And don't forget to follow the channel, because the truth, I promise, is only starting to come to light. Some days I wonder, am I living my own life or just a faint shadow in someone else's story? 3 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I had a goal: get into college, study hard, stand on my own 2 feet. But I didn't know that under the same roof, 2 completely different lives could exist. If you've ever felt overlooked in your own family, leave a comment. Inhabitable know that feeling, and I want you to know you're not alone. It all started one September morning. The early autumn breeze slipped through the dusty dorm window, making me shiver. I jolted out of my hard wooden bed, my mind heavy from just over 3 hours of sleep. 6 a.m., my first shift of the day at the school library. I hurriedly put on my uniform, ran a hand through my hair, and rushed out with a backpack practically falling apart at the straps. The library was the only place I felt at peace. Quiet murmurs, no questions, no judgments. Just books, dust, and me. Every morning I spent 2 hours shelving books left scattered by students. Part of me liked the job, it made me feel useful. But another part screamed I shouldn't have to struggle like this. Back then, I didn't know why I had to push so hard. I thought maybe it was fate. Maybe this was how you grow up. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. After my shift, I'd dive into classes 5, back to back, my eyes drooping from exhaustion. I drank watered-down coffee for lunch. In the afternoons, I'd barely lie down before changing into another uniform this time, an apron for the diner at the corner. My shifts there ran from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. I waited tables, cleaned, and washed dishes when they were short-staffed. Once, while scrubbing soda-stained floors, I got a phone notification Lucas had checked in at a fancy rooftop bar with Melissa, posting a photo of a cocktail with the caption, "Living my best life." I looked down at my hands, holding a soapy mop. The contrast was brutal. Lucas, my brother, was the one the family always praised. Every time I came home, I'd hear them call him the future leader. They'd talk about his podcast, his game-changing startup that never actually made money. They funded everything for him, from his downtown apartment to his brand-new sedan. To them, it was investing in success. Me, I was the lesson in hard work and discipline. Once I got an A+ on an essay about education policy. I brought it home hoping for praise. My mom skimmed it and set it down. "Good. But you should be less theoretical and learn to communicate like Lucas. Don't be so dry." I remember the feeling like I was a ghost. No one really saw me. No one really listened. If you've ever felt invisible in the home you grew up in, share it, because writing it out might be the first step to healing. There was one place that made me feel valued: Grandma Rose's kitchen. I remember that afternoon clearly. I was 18, holding my college acceptance letter, my heart pounding. I brought it to her, hoping she'd be proud. She greeted me with a smile, her trembling hands taking the letter. When she finished reading, she hugged me, her eyes misty. "Daniel," she said, "you're the first in this generation to do this. I'm so proud. I want you to focus on studying. I'll send you money every month. Don't let financial worries hold you back." I cried. Not because of the money, but because for the first time someone truly believed in me. For the first few months, I eagerly checked for letters or emails about the money. Nothing came. I thought maybe she forgot or there was a mix-up. I didn't dare ask. I was afraid of seeming greedy. Eventually, I stopped hoping. I returned to reality work study and trying not to compare myself to Lucas. But that was never easy. The unfairness became a quiet crack in my heart. One night, while typing an essay amidst the noise from the apartment next door, I broke down. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just silent tears falling onto my keyboard. I didn't understand why I was so tired. The answer, as I'd learn later, wasn't about money or grades. It was about the feeling of rejection, of being excluded from the family that was supposed to protect me. But remembering Grandma Rose's promise kept a faint spark of hope alive. That maybe one day the truth would come to light. And I'd finally see, truly see, how much I was worth. Have you ever felt like you had to work twice as hard to be recognized half as much? Let me know, because your story, like mine, deserves to be heard. I used to think a promise from someone who loved you was the most solid thing in the world. But sometimes promises, especially from family, can cut deeper and more gently than any knife. When I got my college acceptance letter, I didn't think about success or fame. I thought about Grandma Rose. She was the only one who made me feel I could achieve something great. I still remember her eyes when she read the letter. They shone, as if she saw her own future continuing through me. And when she promised to support me monthly, I believed her. Completely. The first month passed, and I checked my bank account every morning. Nothing. I double-checked the address correct, my name correct. I thought maybe the bank was slow. By the second month, I started to worry. I didn't dare ask her. I didn't want to upset her, or worse, think I'd misheard. I asked my mom one weekend afternoon while she was arranging flowers in the kitchen, "Mom, can I ask something?" I started keeping my voice light. She didn't look up. "Go ahead." "Grandma said she'd send me money every month for college. Do you know anything about that? Maybe it went to the family account or something." My mom gave a small laugh, not a kind one. "Daniel, you're 18, still waiting for pocket money. Your brother's out there planning a startup and you're asking about cash." I was speechless. She snapped off a lily stem and jammed it into the vase. "You need to learn to stand on your own. We've already given you the chance to go to college. Don't ask for more." I didn't ask again. I left the kitchen, and from that day I never mentioned Grandma's promise to anyone in the family. I got a job the next week. First at the library a few hours each morning. When that wasn't enough, I took shifts at the diner near campus. At night, I'd collapse on my hard dorm bed, too exhausted to think. I told myself, this is how you grow up. Have you ever felt like you had to prove your worth not to the world, but to your own parents? Share below. I believe your story deserves to be heard. Once I got a bad fever. No insurance, no money for a doctor. I curled up in bed wearing 3 layers of clothes and sipping warm water. When I called my mom, not for money, just to hear a familiar voice, she said, "You need to learn to tough it out. Life's not easy." I hung up and felt smaller than ever. I started believing I didn't deserve help. That exhaustion was the price of becoming a better person. They called it building character. But really, I was learning to hide my emotions from my face. Occasionally, I'd get emails from Lucas, pictures of him vacationing in Colorado, him and Melissa in a fancy hotel. My parents would share his posts on Facebook with captions like "proud of our eldest son." Me, I was the independent one, the driven one, but never mentioned. Then one night I got a text from Tyler, my cousin. We weren't close as kids, but as we grew up, we both seemed to sense the hypocrisy around us. "Hey," he texted, "heard you're working 2 jobs. "Yeah," I replied. "Surviving. Know the feeling. My brother gets treated like gold. Me, I'm the spare tire. You still studying, trying." Tyler sent a fist bump emoji. Simple, but knowing someone understood, even through a screen, made me feel lighter. From then on, Tyler was the only relative I talked to regularly. We shared awkward family reunion moments, times we were sidelined in conversations that only revolved around Lucas's achievements. And Tyler was the first to tell me, "You're not crazy. You're not lazy. You're just not being treated fairly." Sometimes a single sentence like that is enough to keep you from falling apart. And you know what? Even through all those nights typing essays with stinging eyes, I held onto the belief that one day Grandma Rose would remember her promise. I used to think if I just tried hard enough, everything would fall into place. But I was wrong. Sometimes the truth doesn't come on its own. It needs to be uncovered, faced, and brought to light. In the next chapter, I'll take you back to that birthday dinner where a seemingly small question from Grandma Rose set off a chain of buried secrets. And with one answer, the entire structure of my family began to crack. Have you ever been in a room full of people that suddenly went so silent you could hear your own heartbeat? I have. And not because someone shouted, but because of a seemingly harmless question spoken as softly as a breeze. A question that shattered the glossy veneer my family had spent decades building. "Dear Daniel, is the $1 $500? I send you every month enough?" That question from my grandmother, Grandma Rose, still echoes in my head like an old tape on repeat. Right after I blurted out, "I've never received a single cent." And then the room stopped breathing. If you've ever been in a moment where the truth hits like an unexpected punch, leave a comment. I believe many of us have seen things no one dared say until someone accidentally or not spoke for us. All eyes left me and turned to my parents, Thomas and Linda. My mom held a frozen smile, her lips trembling but trying to stay calm. My dad stared at his cold cuts, as if hoping to crawl under the table. Grandma Rose, the ever-gentle one, transformed. Her eyes turned icy, her voice low but carrying the weight of judgment. "Thomas, Linda, explain." A few seconds of silence stretched like centuries. Finally, my mom spoke. "We were just holding it for him. To surprise Daniel when he graduated. A gift." A surprise I heard myself repeat like a ghost. 3 years of exhaustion from work and study. 3 years of instant noodles. 3 years of blaming myself for not being good enough to deserve help. And they called it a graduation gift. Lucas, my brother, sat with his legs crossed, shrugging. "Honestly, Daniel, you should be grateful. Not everyone has parents who think that far ahead." If I'd held any hope that Lucas wasn't involved, that sentence erased it. He didn't just know he felt entitled to more. And then, like a scene from a movie no one wanted to watch, Melissa Lucas's fiancé stood up abruptly. Her chair tipped back, her wine glass nearly slipping from her hand. "Lucas, we need to talk. Now, out there." She stormed out without looking back. Lucas glanced around, annoyed, then followed. The silence returned heavier than before. Everyone looked at each other, waiting for the director to yell, "Cut!" Slam! The front door shut, making the whole table jump. A minute later, Lucas returned. Alone. His left cheek red with a clear handprint. He glared at me as if I'd just ruined a wedding photo shoot. "She's gone." "Hope you're satisfied, Daniel. You're good at this." I didn't respond. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I realized words were pointless with people who saw the truth as an inconvenience. I bent down to pick up a napkin that had fallen under the table. When I did, something odd caught my eye, a small, gold-edged piece of cardstock near the table leg. Curious, I picked it up. "Golden Gems Pawn Emporium." I scanned the slanted text and my heart skipped a beat. Item 1.5 carat diamond solitaire engagement ring. GIA certified. Payout $2,000. It didn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure out what this meant. Lucas had pawned Melissa's engagement ring. Right then, a cold thought crept in. If he could betray the person he was about to marry, what else had he and my parents done to me? I looked at Grandma Rose. She sat upright, silent, but her eyes followed my every move. She seemed to know that pawn ticket was the key to something much bigger. I slipped the paper into my pocket and sat back down. In my mind, everything started to shift. I was no longer the struggling student enduring in silence. I was the one who'd found the first thread to unravel a web of lies, and I knew I had to act. But not yet. To expose the truth, I needed more than a scrap of paper. I needed evidence. I needed time. And I needed absolute clarity. If you've ever had a moment where everything, your emotions, your reason, your trust was turned upside down by a single discovery, share it. Your story might help someone else find the courage to seek their own truth. That night I left the dinner with a tangled mind but a clearer resolve than ever. I was no longer afraid. They'd lied, hidden things, stolen years of my youth. Now it was my turn to take it back. That night I stood before my brother Lucas's old room. The door wasn't locked. My family had a habit of trusting each other, or at least pretending to. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was dark lit only by the faint glow of a baseball-shaped nightlight on the desk. It smelled of cheap cologne and unwashed laundry. Clothes were strewn about a half-open laptop, an unzipped suitcase, empty beer cans rolling on the floor. I wasn't there to dig through his past. I was there for evidence. The pawn ticket I'd found at dinner was a clue, and I had a feeling more was waiting to be uncovered. I started with the desk drawer bills, junk mail, a few finance magazines Lucas probably only read the covers of. At the bottom was a stack of bank statements, but nothing unusual. I moved to the closet, the floor under the pillows. Nothing. Then I looked up at the top shelf, where a dusty old Nike shoebox sat quietly as if forgotten for years. If you've ever had to face a truth you didn't even dare imagine, share it in the comments. Sometimes speaking out is the first step to healing. I pulled a chair over and reached for the box. It was heavier than I expected. When I set it on the desk, a cloud of dust made me cough. I sat down and opened the lid. Inside weren't shoes, but a pile of papers tied with a brittle rubber band that snapped when I touched it. The first page credit card statement, Lucas Carter. Balance $6,000. I flipped through. Bills piled up, student debt, personal loans, warnings from credit companies, threats of lawsuits. But then a sheet stopped me cold. Loan agreement, West Shore Capital Solutions. Borrower, Daniel Carter. I read the line again. My name, my old address, my birth date, my social security number. I felt half awake, half dreaming. This wasn't just a one-time misuse. This was a legal loan in my name signed with my signature, but I'd never known about it. I kept flipping. Original loan amount, $25,000. Interest rate, 19.5% APR. Status, delinquent. Current balance, $42, 870. I remembered clearly 3 years ago, I hadn't signed any contracts. I had no steady income, no eligibility to borrow. I wasn't foolish enough to take a loan from a shady finance company. But Lucas had a motive, and with full access to my personal information from my parents' filing cabinet, he had the opportunity. I stared at the paper. It wasn't just proof of betrayal. It was proof of a crime. My brother had stolen my identity. If you're watching this far, I want you to remember, No one, not even family, has the right to take your name, your freedom, your future. If you've been taken advantage of, write it down. You're not alone. I gathered the papers, organized them, and stuffed them into my backpack. My heart was racing, not from fear of being caught, but from anger. A deep, bone-chilling anger. I thought they'd only taken the money Grandma sent me. But no, they'd taken my name, my credit, my future. And then they told me to learn to endure. Right then, I knew this couldn't end with a dining room confrontation. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. It was a crime, and I couldn't stay silent any longer. I walked out of the room and down the stairs slowly. Everyone was still in the living room, arguing, clinking glasses. I didn't care. I went straight to Grandma's private study, the only place in the house that still held silence. I needed time. I needed to think. I needed to decide what to do with this truth. I locked the study door, turned on the desk lamp, and laid out everything. The pawn ticket, the loan agreement, the warning letters. Grandma once taught me, when you know something's wrong, you have two choices. Stay silent and be consumed, or stand up and let the light shine in. I looked at the papers on the desk and knew there was no turning back. I used to think the worst pain was being betrayed by those you trust, but there's something worse having to be the one to bring that truth to light. That night, I locked myself in Grandma's study, the only room in the house that still held its original peace. Outside, voices were still loud. My mom was trying to control the situation. Lucas was silent, probably nursing his wounded pride, but I didn't care anymore. I turned on the antique green-shaded desk lamp and sat in the large wooden chair. On the table, I spread out everything: the pawn ticket for Melissa's ring, the papers from Lucas's Nike box, and the loan agreement in my name. I wasn't trembling anymore. There was only a solid stillness, the kind that comes when you hit the bottom of pain and stand up again. The door creaked open. It was Grandma Rose. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. It was her room. She looked at me. I looked back. No introduction needed. I nodded gently and pointed to the stack of papers. You should see this. If you've ever had to tell the truth to the one family member who still believes in you and feared it might hurt them, you'll know how fast my heart was beating. If you've felt that, leave a comment. Sometimes sharing helps us breathe again. Grandma Rose walked to the table slowly. She sat across from me. At that moment, she wasn't a 75-year-old woman anymore. She was a witness preparing to deliver a verdict. She picked up the first paper. The pawn ticket. She read. No expression. Then the loan agreement. The warnings from the finance company. The red inked lines screaming, "Final notice. Legal action pending." My name repeated on every page. Daniel Carter. Daniel Carter. Daniel Carter. I didn't dare look at her. I stared at my hands. They were clenched tight. After a moment, she spoke. Soft as a breeze. He stole your identity. I didn't answer. She was thinking aloud, not asking my opinion. And your parents. I looked up. She was staring at me, her eyes no longer warm. But not because she was angry at me, because she was holding back tears with every ounce of reason. My son let this child be drained to the core. And he enabled it. No names were needed. I knew she meant my dad, Thomas. I stayed silent. I wanted her to feel this in her own way. She pushed her chair back and stood. Come with me. I stood instinctively. No longer the quiet grandson. At that moment, I was the bearer of evidence, and she was the enforcer of justice. We walked out of the study together. Her steps were slow but heavy with purpose. The dining room fell silent when she appeared like a lake disturbed by a boulder. I stood beside her. For the first time, I saw my family look at me. Not as the invisible one, but as the one holding the scales. Grandma didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table, her voice low and clear as a bell. I have an announcement. No one spoke. Lucas. She looked straight at my brother. You once said Daniel didn't understand financial risks. Now I want you to explain to everyone, is this the kind of risk you meant? She held up the loan agreement. Lucas paled. Melissa, who had just walked back in, stood at the door, her eyes locked on the paper. Lucas stammered. Grandma didn't need to hear it. And this, she held up the pawn ticket, is proof you sold Melissa's engagement ring for cash. There's nothing wrong with struggling, but stealing your brother's identity, betraying your fiancé's love, and lying to your family, that's not struggle. That's cowardice. My mom stood up. Mom, please, this is private. Grandma Rose turned. Her voice wasn't low anymore. It cracked through the air like a whip. Private. Then why, for 3 years, did you spend the $54,000 or $4,000 I sent for Daniel without guilt, and make up a blatant lie about a graduation gift. Then let Lucas steal his brother's identity to borrow money. Do you even know what shame is anymore? The room went dead silent. My dad stared at the table. My mom pulled out a tissue, wiping tears once again. Tears of someone hurt by being exposed, not by their wrongs. Grandma turned to me, gently. Do you want to say anything, Daniel? I shook my head. You've said enough. She nodded, then turned back to the table. As of tomorrow, she declared all financial support for Thomas Linda, and Lucas ends. The house under the bank's mortgage, I won't cover it anymore. Everything Daniel was entitled to will be repaid with interest. And next weekend I'll meet with my lawyer to revise my will and all trust funds. Her words were like a blade slicing through the family's polished facade. No one dared argue. Even Lucas just sat gripping the chair's armrests. If you've ever witnessed a collapse not of a building, but of a family myth, you'll know the feeling of standing in the rubble without satisfaction. I didn't feel satisfied, just tired. But I knew this was necessary. There's something scarier than anger. It's silence, the kind not just from the absence of sound, but the stillness after a bomb goes off where everyone grapples with their own wreckage. After Grandma Rose firmly declared the end of support and changes to her will, the dining room fell into a state of half-stunned, half-frantic silence. Some tried to keep neutral faces, but no one could hide their unease. I stood there still holding the stack of evidence papers that had burned away the illusions they'd built for years. I thought it was over. But then Uncle Marcus, my dad's brother, the most successful carter, stood up. With his usual polished demeanor, he adjusted his shirt collar and cleared his throat as if preparing for a business conference speech. Rose. His voice was slow, almost ingratiating. I think you're right to be upset. But maybe you should think broader. Who hasn't made a bad investment? I blinked. Grandma and I both stared at him as if hearing a warped sound from another dimension. Grandma tilted her head. A bad investment. Yes, Lucas's situation, it's not entirely unsalvageable. We're family. There's a future. If you show a little leniency, maybe he could rise again. Grandma said nothing. She just looked at him with eyes dark as an ancient well where the shadows of doubt began to swirl. And then, like a taut vein snapping, a scream tore through the air. Stop pretending to be noble, Marcus. I turned, startled. Aunt Kathy, his wife, was trembling, her face, pale eyes red and glaring at her husband. I've been quiet too long. You lied to me. Lied to this whole family. You didn't help Lucas out of kinship. You were protecting yourself. Grandma Rose still hadn't reacted, but the room was starting to churn like magma about to erupt. Are you telling the truth? Marcus' grandma asked, her voice not raised, but solid as a sledgehammer. Marcus gave a forced smile. It's not exactly related. Marcus' grandma nearly roared something I'd never seen her do. And then the truth spilled out. Uncle Marcus, the ever-successful and moral one, had begged Grandma Rose for a $100,000 loan last spring, after his company nearly collapsed from personal investments in cryptocurrency. No contract. No interest. Just a promise of honor, one he never kept. I watched Aunt Kathy sob beside her tipped-over chair, her small shoulders shaking. She kept repeating, "You gambled our family's future," and didn't tell me. In that moment, every image of the perfect family I'd once craved shattered like glass, smashed hard. No one stood on a moral pedestal anymore. No one was clean. They were just people with mistakes, schemes, and hypocrisy so deep they believed it themselves. And Lucas. He stood by my mom silent the whole time, but his eyes weren't remorseful, not regretful, just resentful. Every time our eyes met, I saw the deep-seated bitterness, like I was the one who ruined everything, not him. I used to fear that look. I'd dodge it like a blade, but now I wasn't afraid anymore. I just felt pity. Because Lucas never took responsibility for his life, and maybe he never would. I looked at Grandma. Her face no longer held anger. Just pain, the pain of seeing the legacy she'd preserved her whole life, betrayed by those she loved most. You think I'm too harsh, she set her eyes on the window, where moonlight cut through like a thin blade. But today, I didn't just lose money. I lost trust. No one dared speak. She continued, "Family isn't a place to excuse mistakes without accountability. Family is where everyone takes responsibility for their part and respects the parts of others." I don't know if everyone truly understood her words, but I remembered every one. Because that was when I realized the truth isn't just justice. Sometimes it's liberation. Have you ever lived in a family where everyone wore masks? Share with me. Comment below, not to judge, but to find a community that listens. I think that's why I'm still telling this story, not to tear anyone down, but to let people like me, we can step out of old roles. That night I went to bed in a small dorm room, but my mind was no longer trapped. I'd spoken the truth. Grandma had stood up, and the masks had fallen. But one person hadn't spoken. Grandpa Harold. My grandfather sat there silent from start to finish. As I left the dining table, I heard the soft tap of his cane on the wooden floor. Then a hoarse voice behind me. "Daniel, we need to talk." I turned around. Those old eyes looked at me with quiet regret. Sometimes the ones who hurt you aren't the loudest in the room, but the quietest. I'd believed Grandpa Harold was an outsider, the one always silent, living in Grandma Rose's vibrant shadow, without ever interfering. But that night, after all the masks fell, he was the one who left me speechless. After Grandma Rose declared the end of support and changes to her will, the room sank into a silence no longer polite, but a restrained chaos. Aunt Kathy's sobs hadn't stopped. Lucas's resentful glares still pierced me. My dad sat with shoulders slumped, as if about to break, and then a chair was slowly pulled back. The rhythmic tap of a wooden cane on the floor made everyone look up. Grandpa Harold, who hadn't said a word all night, was standing. "Enough!" His voice was hoarse but commanding. All eyes turned to him. I didn't expect anything from him. I still remembered throughout my childhood he'd pat Lucas's shoulder after every sports win, while my academic awards got only a slight nod. But now his eyes were on me. Not through anyone else. Direct and honest. "I have something to confess." He turned to Grandma, then me, then the room. 3 years ago, when Rose said she'd send Daniel money monthly, I stopped it. I said to send it through Thomas and Linda's account. As parents, they'd know how to use it. I just wanted to simplify things. I didn't think, couldn't imagine. He swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling slowly. I didn't think I was putting a knife in the hands of someone who could turn it on my own grandson. My throat burned. I didn't know what I'd expected: an apology, an excuse. But when he repeated softly, "I'm sorry," Daniel, the room froze, not because his words were heavy, but because their sincerity made it impossible to look away. No justifications, no dramatic tears like my mom's. Just an old man back bent, humbling himself before the consequences he'd helped create. Something broke inside me. Not hatred, not anger. A strange sadness for the carelessness, for the kind of love that was silent, but not brave enough to protect. Grandma Rose stood beside him saying nothing, but her hand gripped his tightly. They looked at each other, two people who'd lived together over half a century, now facing the fallout of choices never reconsidered. I spoke, not letting him bear it all. "It's not just your fault. Everyone had a part. But thank you for admitting it. I don't know how many people out there have had someone older stand up, refusing to let the next generation bear the cost of silence. If you've been through a moment where someone who should have protected you let go, share it in the comments. I'm listening." The dining room air was still thick, but it was starting to shift. Something like a collapse, not total destruction, but a breaking open for something new to emerge from the ashes. I looked at Lucas. He still said nothing. His face cold, no longer arrogant, but not remorseful either. Just a dull blade's glare, no longer sharp, but still cutting. Maybe the storm wasn't over. Maybe more truths were unspoken. But at that moment, I was just tired. Bone deep tired. I excused myself to stand. Before leaving the room, I said softly, "I need to breathe." I didn't look back, but I heard Grandma Rose. "Daniel, if you need anything, the study's open." "I'll wait." I went to the back porch. The night air was cold. Asheville's sky was pitch black, not a star in sight. I stood there a long time. In the midst of chaos, when everyone's shouting, crying, blaming, begging, there was a strange moment of peace. Not peace from being vindicated, not from watching others crumble under their guilt, but the odd peace of someone who'd just cut the final thread, tying them to something rotten. I stood up. The chair scraped sharply in the heavy dining room air. All eyes turned to me. My mom Linda, pale as a ghost, and Lucas still silent, his cold, resentful gaze clinging to me like I was the betrayer. I looked at each of them, long and steady. Then I spoke, calmly, clearly, without anger or resentment. Just the truth. I don't need apologies, because I know they won't come from real remorse. Just another mask for wounded pride. I paused. Grandma Rose looked at me, her eyes still as a deep sea. "I don't want anyone contacting me. No texts, no calls, no letters. Nothing." I turned to my parents. The man who'd once been my role model now stared down, avoiding my gaze. The woman who'd sung me to sleep every night now looked like a stone statue, tears unable to fall. I need time, and if one day I'm ready to forgive, that's my choice, not anyone's demand. I stopped. My breathing was steady. I'd never felt stronger. Then I turned and walked away from the dinner table. Away from the room that had once been the heart of every family gathering, filled with fake laughter, hollow toasts, and selective favoritism. The old house creaked under my feet, groaning as the truth was dragged into the light. Each step was a declaration I was no longer the obedient son who gritted his teeth and endured. I was me, and I chose to leave. Before I stepped out the door, I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. I turned. It was Grandma Rose. Her eyes weren't sad or angry. They were the eyes of someone who'd been through war's losses and now saw courage in her grandson. "Daniel," she said softly, but her voice was steady as a rock. "From now on, you don't walk alone." I didn't answer, just nodded. I opened the door. The cold evening air rushed in, waking the lifeless space behind me. I stepped out. The door closed behind me gently but firmly. Before me was the road leading away from the house, away from memories, away from a life I'd once thought I had to accept. Behind me was silence heavy as ashes, but ahead was fresh air. Freedom. A new life waiting. Have you ever had to walk away from a place you called family to protect yourself? Leave a comment if you felt that. I read every story because maybe your journey and mine are more alike than we think. And if you're still staying in a toxic relationship just because you fear being alone, remember that sometimes walking away is the start of a stronger self. So, I walked away without looking back, but Grandma stood there behind me like a guardian of truth. Tomorrow she'd meet her lawyer. And then the will, the legacy, everything they thought was untouchable, would be rewritten. A new chapter would begin. And this time, I wasn't the one left behind. A year might not be enough to heal every wound, but it's enough to learn to look back, not as a victim, but with the eyes of someone choosing to move forward. I got an email notifying me of a full graduate scholarship in public policy one September morning. It arrived in the inbox I'd checked obsessively all summer, when the subject line read, "Congratulations, Daniel Carter." I didn't shout or cry. I just sat quietly in front of the screen, then poured myself a cup of cold coffee the way adults celebrate alone. At that moment, I knew I'd entered a new chapter. No longer the one begging for chances, but the one carving my own path. If you're reading this, tell me, have you ever had a moment that made you feel truly free? Comment below. Maybe it was the first time you said no to something toxic, or just a morning when your heart didn't feel heavy. I want to hear your story. A week after the scholarship email, I received a handwritten letter from Grandma Rose. Not an email, not a text, a real letter. Thick paper, her familiar rounded handwriting. Inside was a check for $10,000 and a short note. "For the years you didn't get what was rightfully yours, though nothing can make up for it." I stared at the check for a long time, then set it down feeling neither triumphant nor overwhelmed. I felt grateful, and clear kindness doesn't need to be loud. I kept a small portion enough for a new laptop, a decent suitcase, and 3 months' rent near campus. The rest I sent away, but not back to Grandma. I sent it to Lucas, with a letter. "Lucas, I'm not writing to forgive you. Forgiveness isn't a gift I give because you want it. It comes only when someone takes responsibility. This money isn't for you to spend. It comes with 2 conditions. You must enroll in a 12-month personal debt management program. You must commit to serious therapy with a licensed professional. If you agree, I won't interfere with the path you choose next. But if not, I'll pursue legal action for the unauthorized use of my identity. The choice is yours. Daniel." I didn't expect a reply. I didn't expect to change him. I just offered a chance and set clear boundaries. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't come from emotion, but from setting responsibility and letting the other person walk toward the light if they choose. 3 weeks later, I got an email from a Chicago law firm. Lucas had signed the agreement and started the debt program. He'd also booked therapy. No thank you, no explanation. I didn't need them, because I didn't do it to be forgiven. I did it to close the old chapter with agency. That was the only way I could move forward without bitterness. You know, the truth is, some family members will never become who we want them to be. But that doesn't mean we have to hold on to resentment to define ourselves. Forgiveness isn't erasing painful memories. It's choosing not to let them control you anymore. If you've ever had to forgive without receiving anything in return, you'll understand it doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. I don't know if Lucas will change, but I know I did my part. I packed my bags before heading to grad school. Each item held meaning, the old backpack from my waiter days, the watch Grandma Rose gave me when I got into college, which I later learned she'd meant to give at graduation, but didn't trust anyone to deliver, and a leather notebook from Grandpa Harold with just one line written, "Sometimes the right thing is the most painful." I carried them all with me, like healed memories no longer bleeding. So see you. The night before leaving Asheville, I sat on Grandma Rose's porch. She sat beside me silent. We looked out at the quiet town where my youth had been buried in silence, but now was the starting point for a new life. She asked softly, "Are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm not angry anymore, and I don't want things to go back to how they were." She took my hand. "That's the first sign of someone ready to start again." Skvas. I left town at dawn before the sun rose. No one saw me off, just Grandma standing at the door, waving like any grandmother. But I knew in her hand was a new will, and in her heart was a kept promise no one could take my future again. There are things you can't imagine doing until the day you do them. Standing at a podium, looking at a room full of young faces, I never thought I'd talk about my own family in public. But I did. 5 years after leaving Asheville, I returned to the same high school where expectations were once my chains. This time, not as a former student, but as a lecturer, an invited speaker for a program on self-worth and the modern family. I didn't come to complain. I came to tell the truth. Asheville's auditorium was the same high wooden ceilings, soft yellow lights warming the space. In the seats were students, teachers, some parents and young adults just past their teens, all silent waiting. The air felt like before a big performance, but here the stage was truth. I started with a question. How many of you have felt like you couldn't be yourself in front of your family? Many hands went up, some hesitant, some firm. I smiled, not out of joy, but because I knew these were the ones who needed to hear this. I spoke about the pressure to succeed, to stay silent, to bear the weight of keeping a perfect family image intact. I told them about betrayal in silence, the shock of learning family used my identity for loans, and the moment I chose to walk away from the dinner table not to divide, but because I had no choice. And then I shared my journey of rebuilding, learning to forgive, without forgetting to love myself unconditionally, to rewrite the will of my own life. I saw eyes light up not because my story was special, but because someone felt less alone. If you've been through something similar, pain from those meant to protect you, leave a comment. You don't need to say everything. Just one line, I understand. Sometimes that's all we need. Shit. When I finished, the auditorium stood and clapped. The sound wasn't loud noise, but a quiet agreement. This story wasn't mine alone. And then at the back of the room I saw him, Lucas, thinner than before, hair cut short, a quiet demeanor. He stood still in the back row, not pushing forward, not trying to be noticed. We didn't lock eyes for long, just a few seconds. But some glances don't need to linger to carry a lifetime of memories. He clapped, slowly, not awkwardly, not forced. I didn't feel hate or overwhelming emotion, just peace, like we'd both reached the other side of something deep and old. He said nothing. Neither did I. We didn't need to. Forgiveness sometimes comes not in words, but in a simple gesture, standing and clapping for something that was once your own wound. That evening, after everyone left, I stayed in the auditorium. I picked up some items, a notebook left under a chair. When I turned, Lucas was gone. But on the seat where he'd been a childhood photo, me and him laughing innocently in Grandma Rose's front yard. On the back, in ballpoint pen, "We were brothers once. Maybe one day we will be again." I don't know if he left it for me for himself or just left it. But I smiled, because I knew the real ending isn't when someone says sorry. It's when both are strong enough to look at each other without resentment. Peace doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly, like an autumn morning, clear skies, gentle breeze, and you realize there's no more noise in your heart. My rented apartment in Boston is on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. From the small balcony, I can see the park where kids laugh on weekend mornings, and adults do yoga under slanting sunlight. Here, I no longer carry the Carter name as a burden. I'm just Daniel. I do work I love, teaching public policy and community development at a small university where students call me Professor D with easy warmth. I have real friends. Tyler still checks on me every Sunday, and Jake, a colleague who makes terrible coffee but tells great stories. I have a girlfriend, Emma, with eyes both gentle and sharp, who always asks, "I don't care about your past. I just want to know, are you being honest with yourself today?" And I am every day. The news of Grandma Rose's passing came on a late winter afternoon. The family lawyer called. His voice was low but clear. She passed in her sleep. No pain. I didn't cry. I sat in my chair looking out at the bare trees. Something in me cracked, not shattered, but a small opening for memories to pass through. A week later, I flew to Asheville to collect her papers. In the file box, besides property documents and the will, was a handwritten letter in her familiar script. Dear Daniel, the grandson who carries not just the Carter name, but the spirit I always hoped to see in my descendants. I know you've borne things you shouldn't have, but you turned it into something beautiful maturity. What I leave you isn't out of pity or to make up for anything. It's my way of saying I believe in you, in your choices, your values, the path you're on. You are my greatest legacy, not houses, money, or land, but your resilience, your kindness, the way you walked out of the storm without losing yourself. Live well, Daniel. But don't live to make anyone proud. Live so you can be proud when you look back. Love, Grandma. Siasis. I folded the letter slowly. I remembered the evening we sat on her porch. She didn't promise grand things, but she kept all the small ones, her presence, her trust, the way she looked at me like I was the best thing this family ever had. I don't need recognition anymore. I don't hate anyone anymore. I don't need my name in a will or apologies at a dinner table. I know who I am, and that's something no one can take away. So, if you're reading this, you might carry a scar too. Maybe disappointment from family betrayal, or just the feeling of never being heard. But you know what those scars, when lived with, named and healed, they speak. They don't shout. They whisper, I'm still here, but I don't control you anymore. If you have a scar that needs to be heard, write it down. You don't need to explain. Just acknowledge it. I'll read. Saptsi. I placed Grandma's letter in a simple glass frame on my bookshelf. Beside it is the childhood photo of me and Lucas, the one he left in the auditorium. Below it, I taped a new note. Not everyone who starts with you finishes with you, but those who choose to change, they deserve a chance. Fire. I don't know how far I'll go. I just know I won't go back to living the old way. Every morning I make coffee, open the window, and look out at the park. I text Emma, want to walk this morning. I call Tyler, you free this afternoon. It's been a while since we played chess. I still teach, still learn, still live, and every day I keep writing a story. Not to get back at anyone, but to keep my heart from suffocating. Hasanas. And if I've learned one thing from all this, it's this. Don't wait for anyone's permission to live true to yourself. Once you know who you are, every rejection, every silence, every injustice becomes just a passing breeze. I'm Daniel Carter, once forgotten by my own family, now the one rebuilding what family means with kindness, patience, and trust. This journey has no end, but I know I'm on the right path. Thank you for staying until the final chapter, and if you need someone to walk with here, I am still writing, still living. This story isn't just my journey. It's the journey of many who've lived in silence, hurt by those they loved most. I've learned that family isn't just where you're born, but where someone chooses to stay, listen and lift you up in your weakest moments. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's the courage to move forward. And self-worth doesn't come from others' recognition, but from how you face pain without falling, without hating, but living kindly with resolve. If you see yourself in this story, leave a comment. I want to hear you because your journey might help someone else heal. And if you believe there are more stories to tell, don't forget to follow the channel. The most meaningful journeys often start with pausing and listening. Thank you for staying until the very end.